Part 1, Stephen Neal Milner, Kelsey Fandrich, Kenneth Fandrich. A small veterinary clinic in Oregon City was designed to feel calm. Soft lighting. Clean floors. Animals brought in by families who trusted the people behind the counter. Inside that space, Stephen Neal Milner held authority without ever needing to raise his voice. He was the owner. The employer. The one who decided schedules, paychecks, and futures. That power stayed invisible most of the time. But it was always present. Kelsey Fandrich worked there under him. She was married. She had a family. What began between them did not happen in public and did not happen loudly. It existed in silence. Glances that lasted too long. Conversations that crossed professional lines. A relationship hidden behind closed doors, protected by discretion and imbalance. Milner was not just a man involved with a coworker. He was her boss. That fact shaped every moment that followed. The relationship did not last. Kelsey decided it had to end. She chose her marriage. She chose stability. She chose the life she had built outside the clinic. Her decision was clear. She communicated it directly. For her, the chapter was closed. For Milner, it was not. The end of the relationship did not create distance. It created fixation. The loss of control unsettled him. What he once believed he possessed was now gone, and he could not accept that choice being made without him. His focus shifted. Not back to work. Not back to routine. Toward Kelsey and toward her husband, Kenneth Fandrich. Kenneth sensed something was wrong. The feeling of being watched crept into ordinary days. Drives that felt familiar suddenly felt monitored. Small coincidences began stacking up. Places where Milner should not have been. Moments that no longer felt random. Kelsey felt it too. The safety she expected after ending the relationship never arrived. Milner did not move on. He observed. He followed. He paid attention to patterns. Court records would later show this behavior was not accidental and not brief. It stretched over time. It deepened. It became deliberate. Tracking devices were used. Movements were studied. Efforts were made to stay unseen. This was not confusion after a breakup. It was a campaign of control. Eventually, Kenneth took action. He sought protection through the legal system. A court order was issued. Milner was required to stay away. The message was direct. Boundaries had been drawn. Violating them would carry consequences. The order did not stop him. Milner adjusted instead. He continued monitoring. He looked for ways around restrictions. He did not step back. He adapted. The authority he once held in the workplace had transformed into something darker. A belief that rules did not apply to him. A belief that his desires mattered more than warnings. The final confrontation did not happen in an argument-filled room or during a heated exchange. It happened in a parking structure at the Intel Ronler Acres campus in Hillsboro. A place meant for routine. A place meant for nothing more than arriving and leaving work. Kenneth parked his vehicle, expecting a normal day. Security footage later showed Milner there as well. Waiting. Approaching. The interaction was brief. There was no prolonged struggle caught on camera. No dramatic escalation. Just sudden violence. Milner restrained Kenneth. Pressure was applied to his neck. The injuries were severe. The damage fatal. Kenneth died there, on concrete, surrounded by cars and silence. Afterward, Milner attempted to control the narrative one last time. Prosecutors said he tried to position the body to make the death appear natural. As if the truth could be rearranged by posture. As if force could be hidden through presentation. Medical findings told a different story. Trauma to the neck and spine made it clear that Kenneth had not died naturally. Surveillance footage, physical evidence, and witness testimony aligned. The pattern that began long before the parking structure now pointed in one direction. Milner was arrested. He was charged with murder, stalking, and violating the protective order. During the trial, he chose to speak. He claimed self-defense. He described a struggle. He attempted to reframe the moment as something forced upon him rather than chosen. The jury did not accept that version. They saw the history. The ignored court order. The tracking. The planning. The persistence. This was not a spontaneous act. It was the end of a long progression. In January of the year 2025, Milner was found guilty on all counts. The sentence reflected more than the final act. Life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, accounted for the pattern of behavior that led there. The judge noted the repeated decisions to cross boundaries and disregard warnings. Each step mattered. Each choice narrowed the path until there was only one outcome left. For Kelsey Fandrich, the verdict brought legal closure, not restoration. A husband was gone. A life had been permanently altered. The clinic where everything began was no longer just a workplace. It was the starting point of a chain reaction that could not be undone. This case reveals how power can distort reality. When authority is confused with entitlement. When access is mistaken for ownership. When rejection becomes an injury to pride rather than a boundary to respect. The danger did not arrive suddenly. It grew quietly, fed by control and refusal to let go. Do you think the warning signs in this case were clear enough to stop what happened, or was the outcome already inevitable by the time the law intervened? In the next part, the story moves deeper into institutional power, where a badge and a federal title became tools in a crime no one wanted to believe was possible. Part 2, Mark Putnam, Susan Smith. The Federal Bureau of Investigation presents itself as order, discipline, distance. Agents are trained to separate emotion from duty and to protect the public by following rules that leave no room for personal compromise. Inside that structure, trust is everything. When an agent crosses a line, the damage does not stay private. It spreads outward and corrodes the institution itself. Susan Smith entered that world from the outside. She was not an agent. She was a source. An informant whose value depended on access, cooperation, and reliance on the people handling her. Her connection to the Bureau placed her in a fragile position. She depended on the system for protection and legitimacy, yet she remained subordinate to it. Among the agents she worked with was Mark Putnam. Putnam was married. He carried a badge, authority, and a reputation built on procedure. FBI rules clearly forbade personal relationships between agents and informants. The reason was simple. Such relationships erase objectivity and introduce pressure where none should exist. Despite that, a secret relationship began between Putnam and Susan. It unfolded quietly. No public acknowledgement. No witnesses. Just private encounters sustained by imbalance. For Susan, the relationship carried meaning. She believed it mattered. She wanted clarity. She wanted honesty. She wanted reassurance that she was not disposable. For Putnam, the relationship became a liability. The very secrecy that had protected him now threatened to expose everything. His marriage. His career. His standing within a powerful institution that tolerated no scandal of that kind. As Susan continued to reach out, Putnam felt cornered. Each contact increased the risk. Each unanswered question brought the possibility of disclosure closer. Investigators would later describe his mindset as driven by fear rather than rage. Fear of exposure. Fear of consequence. Fear that a single conversation could unravel the life he had built. He suggested a meeting. A chance to talk. A final conversation to resolve things. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. In reality, it was a moment designed to end the risk permanently. They met in Kentucky. Away from offices. Away from colleagues. Away from oversight. There were no raised voices reported. No chaotic scene. What followed was quiet and deliberate. Susan Smith lost her life during that meeting. The act was not impulsive. It was final. Afterward, Putnam left her body in a wooded area. There was no immediate discovery. No closure. Susan vanished from the lives of those who loved her. Days passed. Then weeks. Her sister reported her missing. The fact that Susan had ties to the FBI raised immediate concern. Searches were conducted. Questions were asked. Putnam was questioned as well. At first, he denied involvement. He returned to his routines. Continued his work. Spoke carefully. The case lingered in uncertainty. Without a body, without witnesses, suspicion floated but could not land. Time passed. Pressure increased. Evidence accumulated. The truth strained against silence. Eventually, Putnam confessed. Not immediately. Not voluntarily. But when denial could no longer hold. He led authorities to Susan's remains. The confession confirmed what investigators feared. An agent entrusted with enforcing the law had ended the life of a woman who depended on him. The revelation shocked law enforcement and the public alike. It was not just a personal crime. It was a breach of institutional trust. The case was prosecuted in state court. Prosecutors initially sought a charge that carried the possibility of the most severe penalty. To avoid that outcome, Putnam entered a plea agreement. He admitted responsibility under a reduced charge. The court accepted that the act occurred under extreme emotional pressure. The legal system classified the crime accordingly. Putnam received a prison sentence measured in years rather than life. He served most of it before being released. The punishment did not erase what had happened. It simply marked the system's attempt to balance accountability with legal definitions. Susan Smith's family was left with absence instead of answers. Months of not knowing. Years of understanding that her trust had been weaponized against her. The relationship that should never have existed became the reason she never returned. This case exposes how power operates in silence. No shouting. No spectacle. Just decisions made behind closed doors by someone who believed consequences could be managed. The badge did not create morality. It concealed its absence. Here, fear outweighed duty. Exposure felt more dangerous than conscience. And when reputation becomes more valuable than another human life, the system meant to protect becomes the tool that destroys. Do you believe institutions create monsters by protecting authority too well, or do they simply reveal who was willing to betray trust all along? The next part follows a secret workplace relationship where pressure took a different form, and the cost was not only one life, but 2 futures erased at once. Part 3, Lintel Washington, Robert Marks. Lintel Washington moved through her days with quiet structure. She taught children. She followed routines. She showed up when expected and answered messages when they came. To colleagues, she appeared steady and dependable. To family, she was someone preparing for a future that felt close enough to touch. She was pregnant and planning the next stage of her life without drawing attention to it. The relationship that would define her final weeks was not public. It existed alongside staff meetings and lesson plans, hidden inside ordinary workdays. Robert Marks worked in the same school district. He was married. He had a life already established. The connection between them stayed private, sustained by secrecy and caution, until the reality of the pregnancy made silence impossible. Lintel wanted acknowledgement. She wanted responsibility. She wanted honesty. The child she was carrying was not abstract or negotiable. It was real and growing, and it changed everything. For Robert Marks, that reality brought pressure that intensified with every passing day. Exposure threatened his marriage, his job, and his standing in the community. The future he feared was not distant. It was approaching quickly. On the night Lintel was last seen alive, communication between them increased. Phone calls. Text messages. A tone that suggested urgency rather than routine. Investigators would later focus on those exchanges as a turning point. After those messages, Lintel left her home. She did not return. She did not appear at work the next day. That absence was immediately alarming to the people who knew her. Lintel did not disappear without explanation. Her family reported her missing when it became clear that her silence did not fit her character. Law enforcement began retracing her final movements. Phone records became central. They showed frequent contact with Robert Marks shortly before she vanished. The digital trail did not fade. It pointed inward. 3 days later, Lintel's body was found in a ditch in Iberville Parish. She had been killed. The child she carried did not survive. The discovery reframed the case instantly. This was no longer a search. It was a homicide investigation involving 2 lives lost at once. There were no signs of a random encounter. No evidence suggested chance or coincidence. The focus turned quickly to personal connections. Robert Marks became the center of attention. Investigators learned that Lintel was pregnant with his child. They learned that she had wanted him to take responsibility and acknowledge the relationship. The pressure he faced was no longer speculative. It was documented. Digital evidence played a crucial role. Call logs placed them in contact on the night she disappeared. Location data helped narrow where meetings occurred. Witness accounts supported the timeline. Piece by piece, the final hours were reconstructed. The picture that emerged was not chaotic. It was targeted and personal. Prosecutors argued that the killing was motivated by fear of exposure. They described a situation where responsibility felt unbearable to the person trying to avoid it. The child represented permanence. A truth that could not be hidden forever. Ending the relationship was not enough. Ending the risk became the priority. Robert Marks did not admit guilt early. He did not seek a quick resolution. The case stretched on. Years passed. Evidence was reviewed. Motions were filed. The delay prolonged uncertainty for Lintel's family, who lived with unanswered questions while the legal process moved forward. When the trial finally took place, the prosecution presented a narrative built on consistency rather than spectacle. Phone records. Testimony. Forensic findings. Proof of the pregnancy. Each element reinforced the same conclusion. Lintel met Robert Marks on the night she disappeared. She did not leave that encounter alive. The defense challenged the interpretation of evidence. They questioned timelines. They suggested alternative possibilities. The jury was not persuaded. After deliberating briefly, they returned a verdict of guilty on the highest charge available under state law. The killing of a pregnant woman carried specific legal weight. The loss was recognized as 2 lives. The sentence that followed reflected that determination. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court acknowledged the severity of the act and the finality of its consequences. There would be no return to ordinary life. No second chance offered through time. For Lintel's family, the verdict brought confirmation, not relief. A daughter was gone. A grandchild was gone. The future they imagined was erased in a single night. The classroom where Lintel once taught would never hear her voice again. This case illustrates how secrecy collapses under pressure. When a hidden relationship collides with responsibility, the fear of public consequence can become overwhelming. Instead of facing truth, some choose erasure. Instead of accountability, they choose silence enforced through irreversible acts. The tragedy is not only that a life was taken, but that a new life never had the chance to begin. The child existed only as a threat to someone else's reputation. In that calculus, fear outweighed humanity. Do you think responsibility becomes more frightening when it can no longer be hidden, or when it forces someone to confront who they really are? The next part follows a different kind of pressure, where jealousy inside a school community turned private resentment into irreversible loss. Part 4, Carla Hughes, Avis Banks. A middle school is meant to feel predictable. Hallways measured by bells. Classrooms shaped by routine. Adults trusted to protect and guide children. Inside that environment, Carla Hughes worked as a teacher in Mississippi. She understood structure. She understood control. To those around her, the school appeared calm, insulated from chaos. Behind that appearance, a personal conflict was unfolding quietly. Carla Hughes was involved in a secret relationship with a fellow teacher, Kian Pittman. The relationship existed away from staff meetings and lesson plans, hidden from administrators and parents. What Carla wanted from that relationship was permanence. What she received instead was uncertainty. Kian Pittman was not free. He was engaged to another woman, Avis Banks. Avis Banks was pregnant. She was planning a future that included a child, a marriage, and stability. Her presence was not symbolic. It was concrete. A growing life that made choices irreversible. For Carla Hughes, Avis represented more than a romantic rival. She represented replacement. Finality. Exclusion. The school environment did not contain the tension. It amplified it. Carla saw Kian daily. She lived close to the consequences of his decision to commit elsewhere. The engagement and the pregnancy were not distant events. They were approaching realities. Investigators would later describe this period as one of emotional escalation rather than sudden collapse. On the day Avis Banks was killed, nothing in the neighborhood suggested danger. She was at home. In her garage. A private space meant for safety. What happened there was not impulsive. It was prepared. Evidence showed that Carla Hughes had borrowed a firearm before the killing. She did not own the weapon. She sought access deliberately. This step mattered. It demonstrated forethought. The act that followed was not a spontaneous loss of control. It was a decision carried out with preparation. Avis Banks was attacked violently. She was shot multiple times. She was also stabbed. The injuries were severe and excessive. The unborn child did not survive. The scene left no doubt that the intent was to end life, not to intimidate or scare. The attack was personal. It was focused. It was relentless. Police arrived to a scene that immediately pointed away from accident. The investigation centered on people close to Avis. Attention moved quickly toward Carla Hughes due to her connection with Kian Pittman. At first, Carla denied involvement. She denied the affair. She denied access to a gun. She denied responsibility. The evidence did not support those denials. Phone records showed communication between Carla and Kian. Witness statements placed her movements under scrutiny. The borrowed firearm was traced. Ballistics testing linked it directly to the crime. Each piece of evidence removed space for doubt. The narrative that emerged was not complicated. It was devastatingly clear. During the trial, prosecutors laid out the full progression. The secret relationship. The engagement announcement. The pregnancy. The growing resentment. The steps taken to prepare for violence. They argued that Carla Hughes viewed Avis Banks not as a person, but as an obstacle that had to be removed. Kian Pittman testified. His account placed both relationships side by side. The jury heard about divided loyalties and emotional manipulation. They also heard about planning. About decisions made before the garage door ever opened. The defense maintained Carla's innocence. They challenged the interpretation of evidence. They suggested alternate explanations. The jury rejected those arguments. The physical evidence aligned too tightly. The motive was supported by behavior, not speculation. Carla Hughes was convicted on 2 counts carrying the most severe consequences available under the law. 1 count for Avis Banks. 1 count for the unborn child. The court imposed 2 life sentences without the possibility of release. They were ordered to be served consecutively. There would be no return to ordinary life. No reset. The verdict confirmed something uncomfortable. Jealousy does not require chaos. It can operate patiently. It can plan. It can wait for the right moment. In this case, it did not explode. It executed. Avis Banks was not part of the relationship that consumed Carla Hughes. Yet she bore the full weight of its end. Her life, and the life she carried, were erased because someone else could not accept being left behind. This case strips away the illusion that violence always comes from rage. Sometimes it comes from entitlement. From the belief that loss is unacceptable and replacement is intolerable. When jealousy becomes justification, empathy disappears entirely. Do you think jealousy becomes most dangerous when it stays hidden, or when it finally faces the reality it cannot change? The next part shifts to a long divorce battle where resentment did not fade with time, and the past refused to stay buried. Part 5, Betty Broderick, Dan Broderick, Linda Broderick. There was a time when the Broderick family looked complete. A successful husband. A devoted wife. Children. Stability. Betty Broderick built her identity around that image. She supported Dan Broderick through medical school and law school. She raised their children. She managed the home while his career expanded. Their roles were clear. Their future seemed agreed upon. As Dan's career grew, the balance shifted. Long hours at the law firm became routine. Distance entered the marriage quietly. Betty began to sense that decisions were being made without her. The partnership she believed in started to dissolve before it was openly acknowledged. The breaking point came from inside Dan's office. Linda Kolkina was young, ambitious, and worked closely with him as a legal assistant. Proximity turned into intimacy. The relationship crossed professional boundaries and moved into secrecy. Dan did not end his marriage before beginning a new one. Betty discovered the affair gradually, through behavior, through absence, through the unmistakable feeling of being replaced. The discovery did not end the marriage quickly. It began a long unraveling. Divorce proceedings stretched on for years. Courtrooms replaced conversations. Lawyers replaced compromise. Dan controlled financial resources and legal strategy. Betty lost access to the lifestyle she once helped build. She lost the family home. She lost influence over decisions affecting her own life. Court orders restricted her behavior. Judges warned her to stop contacting Dan. To stop showing up uninvited. To stop speaking out. On paper, the system was enforcing boundaries. In Betty's mind, it was silencing her. Friends later said she felt erased. Her role reduced to a problem to be managed rather than a person to be heard. When the divorce was finalized, Dan married Linda. The transition was swift. The new marriage confirmed what Betty feared all along. The life she built had not only moved on. It had replaced her entirely. The anger did not fade. It settled. It hardened. Betty made phone calls. She left messages. She appeared where she was not wanted. Each act was documented. Each warning was recorded. The system responded with restrictions, not resolution. Her emotional state continued to deteriorate while Dan's life stabilized. The final night unfolded without confrontation. In the early morning hours, Betty went to Dan and Linda's home. The house was quiet. The bedroom dark. Dan and Linda were asleep. There was no argument. No exchange. No warning. Betty used a handgun that belonged to one of her children. She fired. Both Dan and Linda were killed in their bed. There were no signs of struggle. No opportunity for defense. The act was swift and final. Afterward, Betty did not flee. She turned herself in. She admitted being present. She claimed she had not planned to kill them. She described years of emotional strain. Years of feeling powerless and ignored. The explanation centered on loss of control. Prosecutors presented a different narrative. They showed a pattern. Years of hostility. Recorded threats. Court documents. Witness testimony. The act was framed not as a momentary collapse, but as the endpoint of sustained resentment. The choice to bring a weapon into a quiet home while its occupants slept carried weight. The first trial ended without a verdict. Jurors could not agree. The question of intent divided them. The second trial focused heavily on Betty's mental state. On whether emotional distress diminished responsibility. On whether pain explained action. The jury ultimately rejected the idea that loss of control erased intent. Betty was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder. The sentence reflected that conclusion. 32 years to life in prison. A punishment that acknowledged intent without categorizing the act as fully premeditated. Over the years, Betty sought parole. Each request was denied. Authorities cited lack of accountability and insufficient remorse. The system that once restricted her now confined her permanently. The cycle closed without reconciliation. This case illustrates how unresolved pain accumulates. How legal outcomes do not always address emotional reality. The courts ended the marriage. They did not end the conflict. The wounds left untreated became something else entirely. Betty Broderick did not lose everything in one moment. She lost it slowly. Piece by piece. The danger lay not in sudden anger, but in years of perceived injustice without release. When injury is carried long enough, it can transform into something capable of destroying lives. Do you think the legal system should have intervened differently before resentment turned irreversible, or was the damage already beyond repair? The next part moves to a case where desire crossed into obsession, and silence between lovers became a plan shared by more than one person. Part 6, Sabrina Lyman, Jonathan Hearn. From the outside, the Lyman family appeared steady. A husband who worked and provided. Children who depended on routine. A home that followed predictable rhythms. Nothing about the household suggested imminent collapse. The instability existed elsewhere, hidden behind work schedules and private messages. Sabrina Lyman worked part-time at a warehouse. It was there that she met Jonathan Hearn. He was married as well. Their connection did not begin with chaos. It began with familiarity. Conversations during shifts. Shared complaints. Gradual emotional intimacy that crossed a line neither acknowledged openly. The relationship became secret, sustained by discretion and denial. Jonathan wanted more. He spoke about a future without obstacles. He framed Sabrina's marriage as the single barrier between him and the life he imagined. Sabrina did not leave her husband. She stayed. The situation created tension that did not resolve. It tightened. Investigators later described Jonathan's mindset as increasingly fixated. He did not see Robert Lyman as a person. He saw him as a problem. An obstruction that prevented resolution. That belief became central. The language used in messages shifted. Frustration turned into certainty. Removal replaced separation as the imagined solution. Robert Lyman had no reason to expect danger. There was no robbery. No history of disputes. No visible threat. On the day he lost his life, he was inside his car near his home. The setting was ordinary. The moment was not. The attack was targeted. The act was not random. It was directed toward one individual and one outcome. Robert did not survive. The absence of theft or collateral damage narrowed the motive immediately. Law enforcement began looking inward rather than outward. Sabrina came under scrutiny quickly. Phone records showed extensive contact between her and Jonathan before and after the killing. The existence of the affair became known. The direction of the investigation changed. What once looked like an isolated incident began to resemble a personal plot. Jonathan was arrested. During questioning, he admitted responsibility. He stated that he acted because he wanted to be with Sabrina. He claimed she knew about the plan. He claimed she encouraged it after refusing to leave her marriage. According to his account, the idea grew between them rather than inside him alone. Sabrina was not arrested immediately. Investigators continued reviewing messages, call patterns, and witness statements. The timeline mattered. The words mattered. Silence mattered. The case was built around intent expressed indirectly rather than action taken directly. Jonathan accepted a plea agreement. In exchange for his testimony, he received a defined sentence. His cooperation shifted the focus fully onto Sabrina's role. The question was no longer who carried out the act. It was who helped shape it. At trial, prosecutors argued that Sabrina's influence was decisive. They described a pattern of encouragement and validation. They pointed to messages that reinforced Jonathan's belief that Robert was the only thing standing in the way. They emphasized what Sabrina did not do. She did not warn. She did not intervene. She did not create distance once the direction became clear. The defense argued that Jonathan acted alone. That obsession was his burden, not hers. That she should not be punished for another person's choices. The jury weighed the evidence. They considered the consistency of communication. They considered motive. They considered opportunity. They found Sabrina Lyman guilty. The sentence reflected her role as a participant rather than the person who carried out the act. 25 years to life in prison. A punishment acknowledging that influence can be lethal even without physical involvement. The ruling made a clear statement. Silence paired with encouragement is not neutral. Robert Lyman's children lost their father. Their lives changed permanently because of decisions made in private conversations. The relationship that promised escape delivered devastation instead. This case challenges the idea that distance from the act equals distance from responsibility. It shows how desire can distort judgment and how validation can become permission. Violence does not always begin with a weapon. Sometimes it begins with agreement. When people share a goal rooted in removal rather than resolution, the outcome no longer belongs to one person alone. The absence of refusal becomes participation. Do you believe responsibility should be measured by action alone, or by the intent quietly reinforced behind closed doors? The next part turns away from physical relationships and into a digital illusion, where jealousy was born online and carried into the real world with fatal consequences. Part 7, Thomas Montgomery, Brian Barrett. Thomas Montgomery lived an ordinary life shaped by repetition. He worked at a manufacturing plant. He followed shifts. He blended into the background of a workplace where people focused on output rather than personality. Nothing about his routine suggested danger. The rupture came from elsewhere, from a world that did not exist beyond a screen. Outside of work, Montgomery spent hours online. He created a false identity and lived inside it. He presented himself as someone younger, confident, and admired. Through that identity, he entered chat rooms and private messages where attention felt immediate and intoxicating. The conversations gave him something his daily life did not. Validation. Escape. Control. The person he believed he was connecting with was not who she appeared to be. The profile was fabricated, managed by an adult woman and her teenage daughter. The relationship existed only as text and imagination. Even so, Montgomery treated it as real. The emotions he developed were genuine to him. He invested belief where there was no substance. Brian Barrett worked at the same plant. He was young and social. He also communicated with the same online profile, unaware of the deception. Neither man understood the truth at first. What mattered was what Montgomery believed. In his mind, Brian had taken something from him. Attention. Connection. Status. The rivalry was invisible to everyone else. There were no public arguments at work. No recorded disputes. Co-workers saw nothing unusual. The conflict existed entirely inside Montgomery's interpretation of messages and perceived slights. Jealousy grew without resistance. It had no real-world feedback to slow it down. There was no face to read. No tone to correct. Only imagined intent. Over time, Montgomery's thinking narrowed. Brian was no longer just a colleague. He became a symbol of loss. The online fantasy reframed reality. Montgomery began to see Brian as an enemy who had interfered with something that belonged to him. The distinction between digital interaction and physical consequence dissolved. On the day it ended, the setting was unremarkable. A factory parking lot after a shift. Brian sat inside his truck, preparing to leave. Montgomery approached with a rifle. There was no confrontation witnessed. No warning heard. The act was brief and decisive. Brian did not survive. The aftermath was marked by absence rather than chaos. Brian's truck remained in the lot. No one noticed immediately. Days passed. His routine was broken, but the break went unseen. It was only when co-workers realized he had not returned and his vehicle had not moved that someone checked. Brian was found inside his truck. The discovery shocked the workplace. A young life had ended quietly, without spectacle, unnoticed by the rhythms of the factory that continued around it. Police arrested Montgomery soon after. During questioning, he admitted responsibility. Investigators searched his home and computer. They found chat logs and fake profiles. The digital trail revealed the internal logic that had driven his actions. The evidence showed how a constructed identity had shaped a real outcome. Montgomery accepted a plea agreement. He avoided a full trial. The court imposed a lengthy sentence. Years meant to account for the severity of the act while recognizing the legal framework of the agreement. He served most of that time before being released under supervision. Brian Barrett's family was left with questions that had no satisfying answers. Their loss did not fit traditional explanations. There was no affair. No financial dispute. No visible motive that made sense without context. The reason existed entirely inside another person's belief system. This case exposes a fragile boundary. When imagined relationships are treated as real commitments. When digital interactions are given the weight of physical bonds. The danger does not come from technology itself, but from the refusal to distinguish between illusion and reality. Montgomery did not lose something tangible. He lost an idea. The response to that loss was irreversible. The harm reached beyond him and into the life of someone who had no understanding of the role he played in another person's fantasy. When perception replaces evidence, and emotion replaces verification, accountability dissolves. The world becomes smaller. Solutions become extreme. The cost is paid by those who never agreed to the story being told about them. Do you think modern digital spaces make it easier for people to confuse attention with attachment, or would this kind of illusion exist in any era? The next part moves into law enforcement itself, where access to inside knowledge turned desire into a calculated plan carried out in plain sight. Part 8, Shauna Nelson, Heather Gauss. Shauna Nelson worked behind a console that never slept. As a police dispatcher, she listened to emergencies unfold in real time. She tracked patrol cars. She understood call flow, response windows, and the invisible gaps between alarm and arrival. Her job required precision and calm. It also gave her knowledge that most people never see. Through that role, she came to know Ignacio Gauss, a police officer. Their relationship developed quietly, away from uniforms and radio traffic. It remained hidden, sustained by secrecy and expectation. Shauna wanted more than moments. She wanted a future. What stood in the way was Heather Gauss. Heather lived a visible life. She was married to Ignacio. She worked at a local credit union. She was raising a young child. Her routines were known. Her mornings were predictable. She represented continuity, not conflict. To Shauna, that stability became the problem. Evidence later showed that Shauna had previously been pregnant by Ignacio. The child was raised within her marriage to another man. That history deepened her belief that she and Ignacio shared something permanent. When he did not leave his family, frustration hardened into certainty. Love shifted into control. Control demanded resolution. Shauna understood the system intimately. She knew how early shifts operated. She knew response times. She knew where cameras were limited and where witnesses were unlikely. This knowledge did not remain theoretical. It became operational. On a cold morning, Heather arrived at work as she always did. The parking lot was quiet. The hour was ordinary. As she crossed the space toward the building, someone approached. The commands were brief. The action was immediate. Heather did not have time to escape. She did not have a chance to protect herself. The response was swift. Because Heather was married to a police officer, the urgency was immediate. Investigators treated the scene with heightened focus. They examined witness descriptions. They traced movements. They reviewed schedules and communications. The search did not stay broad for long. Attention turned inward. Shauna's access and proximity stood out. Her communications revealed motive. Her movements aligned with opportunity. The same knowledge that once helped coordinate safety now explained how the act could occur with precision. An internal investigation unfolded alongside the criminal case. Records were reviewed. Logs were analyzed. Patterns emerged that did not rely on speculation. They relied on overlap. Timing. Access. Intent. At trial, prosecutors presented a case built on structure rather than shock. They explained how the role of a dispatcher provided insight that could be misused. They showed how planning replaced impulse. How the act was not driven by panic but by preparation. The defense challenged interpretation. They questioned reliability. They argued coincidence. The jury focused on consistency. The timeline held. The evidence converged. The conclusion did not require imagination. Shauna Nelson was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release. The sentence reflected the gravity of betraying both personal trust and professional duty. The system that relies on integrity had been turned inward and exploited. Heather Gauss's family was left with absence and questions. Her child lost a mother. A routine mourning became a permanent divide. The damage extended beyond one household into a community that believed in the safety of its institutions. This case reveals how control can masquerade as love. When access becomes leverage. When knowledge becomes permission. The danger is not just in breaking rules, but in understanding them too well. Here, the protector became the threat. The mechanisms designed to save time were used to buy it. The silence on the radio after the act was not accidental. It was calculated. Do you think specialized knowledge increases responsibility, or does it tempt people to believe they can act without consequence? In the next part, a powerful office affair ends without a body, leaving a trail of certainty built entirely from what could no longer be seen. Part 9, Thomas Capano and Marie Fahy. Power changes how people hide. Inside government offices, discretion is currency. Schedules are controlled. Access is managed. Conversations happen behind closed doors where influence feels normal and consequences feel distant. Thomas Capano moved comfortably in that world. He came from a prominent family. He worked as an attorney with deep political connections. Authority surrounded him and protected him from scrutiny. And Marie Fahy worked nearby as a scheduling secretary for the governor. She was organized, serious about her career, and careful with her reputation. Their paths crossed through work. What developed between them stayed private by design. Capano was married. The relationship existed in secrecy, sustained by imbalance and expectation. At first, the arrangement suited Capano. He controlled when and how contact occurred. For Anne-Marie, the situation became heavier over time. She wanted clarity. She wanted honesty. Friends later said she wanted to move forward with her life. She began seeing someone else. She tried to create distance. Capano did not accept the ending. Messages continued. Pressure increased. What had once been discreet turned persistent. Anne-Marie felt watched rather than wanted. The relationship that began quietly became a source of unease. Power did not loosen its grip when she said no. It tightened. On a summer afternoon, Anne-Marie met Capano for what would become the last time. She left work and went to see him. After that meeting, she vanished. She did not return home. She did not contact friends. She did not access her bank accounts. Everything stopped at once. Her family reported her missing when the absence became impossible to explain. Investigators faced an immediate problem. There was no body. There was no clear scene. What they had instead was behavior that did not fit voluntary disappearance. Anne-Marie was careful. She did not abandon her life without reason. Attention turned quickly to Capano. Phone records showed frequent contact near the time she disappeared. People who knew them described him as distressed after the breakup. His behavior drew notice. Still, without physical evidence, the case moved slowly. Time passed. Public interest grew. The investigation expanded. Then a crucial shift occurred. Capano's younger brother came forward. He told authorities that Thomas had confessed. According to his account, Anne-Marie had been harmed inside Capano's home during an argument. The description was calm, methodical, disturbingly precise. The account continued. The body was placed inside a large cooler. The brothers transported it by boat. The ocean became the final hiding place. Despite extensive searches, Anne-Marie was never recovered. The absence that defined the case remained. Another detail emerged that strengthened the narrative. Capano had asked a different woman he was involved with to purchase a firearm for him. She did. Investigators tied that purchase to the case. Prosecutors argued it demonstrated planning. Capano later attempted to deflect responsibility by suggesting an accident caused by someone else. The explanation did not hold. Capano was arrested and charged. The case drew national attention. Many were stunned that a well-connected attorney could face such consequences without a body ever being found. The trial focused on consistency rather than spectacle. Phone records. Testimony. The brothers' statements. The weapon purchase. Each element reinforced the same conclusion. The defense emphasized absence. No remains. No direct physical proof. They argued doubt should prevail. The jury weighed the evidence as a whole. They focused on behavior before and after the disappearance. They focused on opportunity, motive, and actions taken to conceal. They returned a guilty verdict on the highest charge. At sentencing, Capano initially received the most severe penalty available. The decision was later overturned on procedural grounds. The sentence was revised to life in prison without the possibility of release. The outcome reflected a legal truth that unsettled many observers. A crime can be proven without recovery. Silence does not erase responsibility. Capano spent the rest of his life in custody. And Marie's family never received what most families hope for. There was no grave. No final location. Only certainty built from evidence and loss. This case challenges a common assumption. That absence protects the guilty. That without remains, truth dissolves. Here, it did not. The outline of the act remained visible through planning, confession, and concealment. Power made Capano confident. It did not make him careful enough. The systems he navigated daily became tools he believed he could manipulate. In the end, they reconstructed what he tried to erase. And Marie Fahy did not disappear. She was removed. The effort to make her vanish only clarified the intent behind it. The lack of a body did not soften the reality of what happened. It sharpened it. Do you think a case without physical recovery demands a higher burden of belief, or does behavior sometimes speak more clearly than evidence left behind? In the next part, a public confrontation turns a hidden workplace affair into a single moment that changes multiple lives forever. Part 10, Lily James, Lori DuPont. Workplaces are built on routine. Entry badges. Timetables. Shared spaces designed for cooperation rather than danger. When personal boundaries collapse inside those systems, the damage does not stay private. It spreads into corridors meant for safety and turns familiarity into vulnerability. Lily James was young and focused. She coached water polo at a respected school in Sydney. Her days were structured around training sessions, students, and preparation for the future. A brief personal relationship with a coworker ended clearly. Lily set boundaries. She moved on. She returned to her routines believing that clarity would be enough. It was not. After the breakup, attention did not fade. It sharpened. Lily's movements were observed. Her schedule was learned. Location sharing technology was used to monitor where she went and when she would be alone. This was not confusion. It was preparation. In the days leading up to the attack, the environment itself was tested. Cameras later showed the coworker entering and leaving staff areas repeatedly. Movements were practiced. Access points were studied. A weapon was purchased in advance. The choice of location mattered. Control mattered. On the evening Lily returned to campus to change clothes before attending her own game, nothing seemed unusual. Students had left. Staff areas were still open. This was part of her normal routine. Inside a staff bathroom, the plan reached its end. There was no chance to escape. No warning that could change the outcome. Emergency responders arrived quickly. It was too late. The place where Lily taught and supported others became the site of irreversible loss. The person responsible left the area and later ended his own life. There would be no courtroom. No cross-examination. No sentence. The story ended without a trial. The investigation continued anyway. Findings showed intent rather than impulse. Tracking. Preparation. Control of the environment. The conclusion was clear. This was not a sudden emotional reaction. It was deliberate. Across the world, years earlier, another workplace had already shown how warnings can be ignored with fatal consequences. Lori DuPont worked as a nurse in a hospital in Ontario. Her role was care. Precision. Responsibility. She had previously been involved in a relationship with a physician who worked in the same building. When the relationship ended, Lori tried to create distance. She spoke up. She told colleagues she was afraid. She raised concerns about her safety. Those concerns were known. Hospitals are busy places. Movement is constant. Alarms sound. People assume that visibility equals protection. In Lori's case, that assumption failed. The presence of her former partner in the same workplace erased the boundary between personal fear and professional obligation. During a regular shift, Lori was attacked inside the hospital. Staff and patients were nearby. The space dedicated to healing became the site of sudden violence. Lori did not survive. Afterward, the person responsible ended his own life. Again, there would be no criminal trial. What followed was scrutiny rather than prosecution. An inquest examined how warnings were handled. Testimony revealed missed opportunities. Known risks without effective response. Systems designed to protect did not act decisively enough. The findings did not undo the loss. They documented failure. They showed that awareness without intervention is not protection. Policies without enforcement are not barriers. Both cases share a common thread. The end of a relationship was not respected. Boundaries were stated and ignored. In both environments, authority and access replaced accountability. The workplaces were not random backdrops. They were integral. They provided familiarity, entry, and opportunity. In Lily's case, technology enabled tracking. In Lori's case, proximity enabled persistence. Different tools. Same result. The absence of decisive action allowed danger to remain inside spaces assumed to be safe. These stories are not about passion spiraling out of control. They are about entitlement. About the belief that rejection is negotiable. About systems that respond after harm rather than before it. When personal safety depends on institutional response, delay becomes risk. When warnings are treated as discomfort rather than danger, outcomes escalate quietly. The cost is paid by those who did what they were supposed to do. Speak up. Set boundaries. Continue their lives. Workplaces cannot be neutral when power and access are involved. Silence favors persistence. Inaction favors escalation. The line between private conflict and public tragedy disappears when early signals are dismissed. Lily James and Lori DuPont did not lose their lives because they failed to act. They lost their lives because others did not act when it mattered. The lesson is uncomfortable. Safety is not guaranteed by walls, titles, or routines. It is guaranteed by response. When boundaries are not defended, harm does not announce itself. It arrives prepared. Which moment in these cases do you think should have changed the outcome, and why? Stay with the next story to see how a single public confrontation turned a hidden affair into a moment that reshaped every life around it.